Hey everybody, BTO Pro here. Today I'm going to show you how we were able to integrate NASA's photo and image search with HAX, our headless authoring system, and why it's a lot harder to find an API than it is to actually ingest it in HAX. So if you have ever looked, you can go to api.nasa.gov. There's a bunch of different APIs here. Some of them you need authorization for, but I'm going to hit NASA API listing. You see get into, how do you get a token, registering in case you want to go, to without rate limiting. For this demo, I'm not going to get a key. I actually don't even think you need a key for this one. So what I'm going to is a NASA image and video library, and you'll see it gives you just a little bit of detail about what it is. It's a pretty simple search, to be perfectly honest. You don't really need a lot of information to start querying, which is awesome. What I have in this other tab here is it says if I hit images-api.nasa.gov and then do /search q equals whatever, I can look for that. So I have a JSON viewing plugin here, so it's a little bit cleaner. So you can see it looks, when it comes across to us via this API, in this case I'm looking for Orion's belt. I have collection, and then I've got items, and then you can see there's some pagination, and we'll hit that in the future. And then in those items, I can see the items that came across from the API. So this is generally what an API looks like if you haven't seen one, as far as what that JSON means. So the thing I care about as far as HAX would be, wouldn't it be cool if we could search in HAX, query against NASA's image library, and then start using our gizmos automatically? And obviously I have an answer to that. So let's see what that looks like. So you see what the API looks like on this side. So what I did is I construct a query, I make sure I can hit it, I can make sure I can change it right. So if I change this to moons of Jupiter, hey, there's stuff with moons of Jupiter spelled exactly that way in what comes across. And so I can see, they've got some metadata associated with it. Data was created, a nice expressive title, additional keywords to relate it to other things, so that, now if I wanted to switch this and say Hubble, now I can find all the things that are from the Hubble Space Telescope. Their API is pretty stinking fast too, which is cool. In fact, in this case, I can see that it knows there's 4,506 items. Now it returned me the first 100, which is what paging is, right? I could go to this address, and then this is the second page of results, and I can go to the third page of results, and so on and so on. So for what I have rigged up at the moment, I'm not doing any paging. I'm just going straight to it. But what this looks like in HAX, so in my HAX body here, this is kind of an example application, if you will, using HAX. So there's the content that's pre-populated, and then down here in the HAX manager, you see we have source. And so source is this really flexible tag that can make a web service query, illustrate what the thing is, and parse, and then pass along to the rest of the system. So this is a really critical, highly advanced tag. This is how we use YouTube and Vimeo directly in context to go and do searching. So let's see what the NASA one looks like. It's pretty simple, which is awesome. So to set up a HAX source, I say, yeah, the user is going to be able to search this source. Some sources you could imagine would just automatically return information, if you're pre-populating what the endpoint is heavily. But this one I want people to be able to search. So details, title is that this is NASA media, right? Stuff from NASA. The icon is the iron icon subset. So this is the all-inclusive. It's a little infinity sign. Blue, let's make this purple just for fun. Author, I put NASA. Teaser and description aren't used yet, but you can imagine, saying, kind of giving people an idea of what it is they're going to search against. Now comes all the highly technical part, which in the case of this one's really easy. So endpoint. So this is what I had in that other window, right? So if I go to this, in the other window, it'll say, hey, I expect Q as a search parameter. Then we have request parameters, haha. And so this is anything extra that you would add into the URL. Now, for example, that page 2, right? If I put Q, Q equals whatever. So if I Q equals Orion, that will now default the request to the endpoint to basically do the equivalent of appending on here, Q equals Orion. So that's how these two are mapped to one another. And now this wouldn't make a ton of sense, but if I really wanted to in that regard, I could put page and then do 2. And now the second page of results is what's always going to come across for Orion. Again, that doesn't make a lot of sense to do out of the box, but just so you get an idea of the relationship. Then we have the query parameter. So what parameter in that URL in this request part is going to need to be binded to our search field. And so the thing that is the query parameter that people can just type in whatever is Q, and so it handles the rest of that. Then we got response map, and this is one of the trippier things I've gotten to write in a while. So this is effectively looking at the structure of what comes back across, and then we're going to remap it into these little cards. And so in order to generate a board of things you could select from, I need to know what the structure of the data that I just hit was. So in this case, collection.item. So that comes from the fact that whenever I make a request to this API, let's just make it the pure Q equals Orion. Whenever I make a request to this API, you can see I have collection, and then in collection there's 5 items, and then I've got items. And so this is looking for, in HAX, we're looking for the root, like where is the meat of the data, right? Because the structure can come across kind of however, but generally speaking, all the metadata is kept abstracted from the actual response items. So in this case, it's collection.items. So that's going to tell HAX, hey, when you're trying to engineer a wall of data, I need you to look in here in the data array. So now it's as if that's the starting point. So what's the default type of information I'm getting? Well, it's an image. And so that helps bubble up to the board what thing is selected. URL would be like if you had a subset of a URL to use. So for example, in the case of YouTube, right, I have this youtube.com/watch v equals is actually the base part that should be appended with video ID added into this part at the end here. So the NASA one doesn't need that just because of what comes across. So if we're looking for images, we'll see there are full paths to images in here. And so if we search for an image in here, there we go, we can see that there's a href and it has the full qualified link to the thing that we actually want. So if I would click and open that, there's an image from NASA, right? So how do I get to that? So I just need to look at what that structure is. So for identifier, again, because ID is appended to the end of URL at the moment, I need field underscore image. And if I look for field image in here, oh, if I went to the right thing, sorry, it wasn't field underscore image. It's links, and then there's .0, because if you notice, this is an array. And so there's an array of items. It says in here there's 2 items. And so you can do, because it's a potential array, there could be multiple links off of this item. If you use .0, that's the equivalent of the array position 0, or the first part of the array. And so that's like me stepping down and saying, hey, in collection.items, whatever the item is, .links, .0, .href, which is right now going to put me right at this value. I need you to take that value and I need you to bind it to my identifier. You'll notice I also have that bound to the image in this case. And so the ID that gets bubbled up from an item could potentially be different. If you think of like a thumbnail versus the real deal. In YouTube, this would be your thumbnail would be in an image slot for a visual presentation, but the thing you actually want to select and bubble up is not the image. So for this image, media selection thing is a little different. But then title, how do we get title out of this? So data, again, there's that array position, so .0, .title, and now I have Orion Neural Buoyancy Lab, NBL activities. Same for description, right? So there's description right there. I could even put in photographer if I wanted to, but I don't have a field for that just yet. Image, that is your thumbnail image that's going to appear on a board. And there's even actually support for, let's say that the data you're accessing isn't just images. Let's say it's going to return text and images and videos and who the heck knows what. So long as there's a field expressing what that is, which there is off the NASA API. YouTube and other ones didn't need this. But there we go. So we can see that down in this list, there are some things that have media type video. This is then saying, hey, whenever someone selects this, I need you to bubble up as part of the, hey, what got picked, that it was a video, or that it was an image, or that it was a fill in the blank. So let's see what this actually ends up netting us. So I have HAX body here. Oh, I need to restart Polymer. So I do Polymer serve -- open. It's going to pop up a URL here, and then I'm going to go to /demo just to get the kind of wrapper Chrome off of this. Now I'm going to edit something. You see, I got the HAX editor. I can change that position, whatever. I'm going to hit Gizmos, and now under Find Something, we have our purple NASA media. Again, that's showing up because of that single tag there, right? So that's their details part. Any changes that I would make to details, it would reflect to this little button. So the point of, in finding something, imagine we're going to start having a ton of these. I'm starting to find every API I can possibly integrate with to get as a source of media, so that I could just go, oh, geez, what is it I want? And start to filter based on, title or tag or description of that resource. So I know I want NASA, so I'll just filter to NASA. Then I can select NASA, and you see it just gives me this search input. That search input only shows up because this flag is here on the tag to say, hey, this can be searched. Now, whenever I type into that field, it's actually going to populate the information that goes into this Q value because of query param. And so all that data binding happens automatically for our end user. So what I'm going to search for, I'm going to search for Orion. And now when I search for Orion, it's, and it did the little Elms loading thing. And you see it's not perfect, right? I need to clean up aspects of it, get it to resize the grid appropriately, stuff like that. It actually went and it just pulled those 100 images in. So the NASA API is pretty stinking awesome. Those images are rendered because we have this, the title, right? So the title comes from that part of the array. For example, if I do Orion's belt, I think there's only one item for that, right? So there's Jupiter's rings with Orion's belt is probably the full title. Let's do moonwalk. Okay, these are people that walked on the moon. These are other things tagged as moonwalk for whatever reason. Jupiter's moons. There we go. So there's Jupiter's moons. You see the API is really fast, updating this stuff in real time. So now let's say I want to pick one, right? Because the whole point of this is to select one. Now I'm going to pick one of these. And this is where the rest of HAX takes over. What that just did is it bubbled up an event from here, and part of that event said, hey, someone selected something, and the thing they selected was whatever that API's endpoint dictated the media was. So if it was a video, it would bubble up and say, hey, I've got a video for you, and that video is located at this URL. In this case, it bubbled up, hey, I've got an image for you, HAX, and that image is at this URL. And so that URL then gets injected right here into the source field. The other thing that is invisible right now as to what's happening, because HAX is not built specific to this thing called a media image, which is what's presenting that. If I look under Make Gizmos, there's a styled image here. And so if I select styled image, that shows the form for this, and that's what's being populated. But that's not assuming that it's styled image. If I had multiple image tags, things that could process an image, these tags, when they register with HAX, are basically holding up their hand whenever someone asks and says, hey, I got an image, who wants it? And so then if it was image, maybe the accessible GIF and the styled image hold their hand up because it's a .gif, because maybe I want to just put a .gif in as a styled image. If it's an audio file, maybe the mini audio player puts its hand up, or maybe the video player puts its hand up because I was handed a thing claiming to be a video and it has a link. And so these types of handoffs between these things is why we're going to be able to wire in all kind of other API integrations really fast. The actual writing of this integration took like 3 or 4 minutes. Most of the time is spent just finding where the API is And even just telling you about it right now took far more than it did to actually build. So I could do this eclipse montage, round box, alt text in here. There's the caption. What we're also thinking is part of why I'm integrating all these APIs is to try and find what other stuff we should be accounting for to pull along for the ride. So, for example, there's nothing in HAX Source at the moment that says this is where the copyright info is from. And with a lot of this media coming from a other location, it would be really good to have copyright info, or even just who made it to credit someone. So the NASA APIs come across and they don't have any copyright stuff listed in them, I don't believe. They have who actually took them, and some tag information, but they don't say like Creative Commons or anything like that. Some of the other APIs that I've hit do have that information, like Vimeo, for example. Users have to classify what their video is stored as, and so it would be really good if we were able to keep that stuff as it came across, because then we could start to just wire up OER schema metadata automatically based on what the endpoint said. So if something, if it's a Wikipedia article, and Wikipedia we know is Creative Commons CC0 or whatever, we could just put that metadata in automatically and start building out attribution for people just based on them selecting things. So I've got that image, I can insert it, and now I have it here in HAX. I took this image from the NASA website's API. I could go and find another thing. Military plane, maybe? I don't know. Oh, there we go. There's some military planes, Blue Angels, very cool. So I can pull that in and wire it up. And you can see I can pull stuff from their API way faster than I could ever actually go find it, figure out what the correct source is to write, generate it, and put it in place. Versus now, when I hit export and I download this file and run a static copy of it, I now have all that HTML automatically authored for me, which is part of the power of HAX. Is once we get all these sources wired up, you're going to basically have your own little, Roku remote, if you will, as far as all these ins and outs being centralized in one place, and you'll be able to author everything in one cohesive, very easy to use manner. And publish anywhere is where we're going.